From the 52nd floor of his corporate tower in the heart of New York City, Richard Sterling looked out at the city like a bored god. At 51, he had built a tech empire that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the country, but also the most arrogant. His office was a monument to his ego, black marble walls, multi-million-dollar works of art, and a view that constantly reminded him that he was, literally, above everyone else. But his greatest pleasure was not his wealth, but the sadistic power it gave him to humiliate those he considered inferior. That afternoon, he smiled as he heard the intercom. His new entertainment had just arrived, the cleaning lady, accompanied by her young daughter. The glass door opened, and Maria Sanchez entered, pushing her cleaning cart, a 45-year-old figure shaped by submission. Behind her, with hesitant steps, came her daughter, Lucy. At 12 years old, the girl was the antithesis of the luxury that surrounded her. Her school uniform, mended but immaculate, and the public library books in her backpack contrasted with the gleam of the marble. Her eyes, however, were what set her apart. They were large, curious, and held a spark of defiance that years of hardship had not yet managed to extinguish. A light that Richard, in his arrogance, was unable to see, but which would soon blind him. "Stay, this will be fun," Richard said, his voice the growl of a predator. He forced Maria to admit, in front of her daughter, that she had barely finished high school. "And here you have your little girl, who has probably inherited the same mediocre genes," he mocked. He then presented Lucy with an ancient document, a mysterious text that the city's best translators had been unable to decipher. "Do you know what this is, girl?" he asked, expecting humiliation. But to his surprise, Lucy did not back down. She approached and examined the strange characters with an intensity that unnerved him. The trap was set, but the prey was not acting as expected. A cruel billionaire, a humiliated mother, and a 12-year-old girl facing an impossible challenge. His arrogance seems limitless, but her intelligence may be the biggest surprise of all. If you believe that knowledge is the greatest fortune, subscribe to the channel and like this video. Behind the facade of a shy girl, Lucy lived in a secret universe of knowledge. While her mother, Maria, worked 16-hour shifts, the girl transformed the municipal public library into her private university. There, amidst worn books and respectful silence, she not only studied, but was taught by a community of invisible masters. She learned Mandarin from Mrs. Wang, a retired professor from Beijing, Arabic from Ahmed, a Syrian refugee who drove a taxi during the day, and Italian from another Maria, a woman who also worked as a cleaner. These were people the world of Richard Sterling would dismiss as irrelevant, but who, for Lucy, were portals to the world's wisdom, mentors who gave her free what no fortune could buy. Lucy's hunger for knowledge was fueled by her mother's sacrifice. She saw the exhaustion in Maria's eyes, the rough hands from hard work, the dignity with which she faced each day to ensure her children had food and school supplies. Her mother's phrase was a mantra in her heart: "Education is the only thing no one can take from you, my daughter." Therefore, every new language she learned, every book she devoured, was more than an intellectual exercise. It was an act of love, a way of honoring her mother's silent struggle. She studied to build a future where Maria could finally rest, to prove that her mother's sweat had watered the seed of something great. But Lucy's quest went beyond modern languages. On weekends, she found a way into the university library, where the librarians, noticing her unusual thirst for knowledge, let her explore the classical languages sections. There, the 12-year-old girl immersed herself in ancient texts, studying comparative linguistics, the evolution of writing systems, and the philosophy behind words. While Richard Sterling was learning to see the world through figures and power, Lucy was learning to see it through history, culture, and the interconnectedness of human wisdom. The impending confrontation in his office would not be just between a child and an adult, but between two world views. the empty arrogance of power against the deep wealth of knowledge. Believing he had won, Richard turned to his desk with an air of contempt. Enough games. Maria, start cleaning, and you, girl, sit there and be quiet. He dismissed her, as if she were an object, certain that his display of power had crushed any shred of dignity they might have had. For him, the natural order of the world had been restored. The rich command, the poor obey. He didn't realize that, with his cruel words, he had not silenced the girl, but had awakened the giant sleeping within her, an intellectual force that was about to turn his universe upside down. "Excuse me, sir." Lucy's voice, calm and incredibly firm, cut through the silence. Richard turned, irritated by her audacity. The girl walked toward him, not with the fear he expected, but with the posture of someone about to ask an important question. She looked him directly in the eye. "You said the best experts can't read this document," she stated, her voice clear. "Yes, so what?" he replied, impatient. Then came the first blow, a simple, logical question that completely disarmed him. "And you? Can you read it?" The room, once the stage for his arrogance, suddenly became a silent courtroom where he was the defendant. For the first time in years, Richard Sterling stammered. He, the titan of business, was intellectually cornered by a 12-year-old child. "That's different. I'm worth billions," he managed to say, appealing to his only source of authority. But Lucy was not intimidated. "Does that make you smarter?" she retorted, the calm in her voice, sharper than any shout. "My teacher says that intelligence isn't measured by money, but by what you know, and most importantly, by how you treat other people." The simple, profound truth of those words hit Richard like a slap, exposing the fallacy upon which he had built his entire life and empire. Seeing him speechless, Lucy delivered the final blow. "You assumed I couldn't read the document because of my mother's profession," she said. "But at no point did you ask me what I know or what languages I speak." A chill ran down Richard's spine. There was a dangerous certainty in her voice. "What languages do you speak?" he asked, the question already a surrender. "I speak 9, Lucy replied, and the sentence exploded in the silence of the room. "And you, Mr. Sterling? How many languages do you speak?" The question was rhetorical, a checkmate. The most powerful man in the room had been completely disarmed, defeated not by a business rival, but by the wisdom of a girl he considered trash. Maria watched the scene, paralyzed, a spectator in her own life. The girl she had raised, the quiet child who did her homework at the kitchen table, had transformed into a giant. She heard her daughter list 9 languages and felt the world waver. She knew Lucy was dedicated, that she loved the library more than any playground, but she had never imagined the depth of that knowledge. The daughter she was trying to protect from the world had just revealed herself as a fortress, a secret, universe of wisdom that she, her own mother, did not know. The initial shock was so intense it left her breathless, a mixture of astonishment and the strange feeling of meeting her daughter for the first time. Right after the shock, however, came a wave of pure, overwhelming terror. Maria knew Richard Sterling. For 8 years, she had learned to read his nuances, to predict his fits of rage, to navigate his ocean of arrogance. And her daughter, her small, brave Lucy, had not just challenged him. She had publicly humiliated him in his own sanctuary of power. Maternal fear consumed her. In her mind, she already saw the dismissal being thrown out, the difficulty of finding another job, the struggle to feed her children. She wanted to run, to pull Lucy by the arm, to beg the boss's forgiveness. The survival instinct screamed at her to bow down, to appease the monster before he devoured her family's future. But as she watched her daughter standing tall, firm, facing the most powerful man she had ever known without a shred of fear, Maria's terror began to transform into something new, an immense and fierce pride. She saw in Lucy not the recklessness of a child, but the courage of a warrior. She saw the materialization of her own mantra, the proof that education was, indeed, the only thing no one could take from them. Her daughter wasn't just defending herself. She was defending her mother's dignity, her family's worth. And at the moment, Lucy reached out her hand to take the document. Maria understood. The fear no longer mattered. Her daughter was extraordinary, and she would be a witness to her greatness. With an almost imperceptible nod, Richard relented. "Show me," he whispered, the words a mixture of challenge and surrender. Lucy approached the table, and the entire room held its breath. With steady hands, she took the ancient document. Her eyes scanned the characters, not with the confusion of a child, but with the focus of an experienced decipherer. After a long moment of silence, she made her first revelation, one that was in itself brilliant. "It's not a single language," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "It's a linguistic puzzle. Several ancient languages written in layers, all talking about the same thing." The simplicity of that insight, which had eluded all the experts, was the first sign that something extraordinary was about to happen. Then she began to read, and the boardroom, a temple of modern capitalism, was filled with the sounds of ancient civilizations. First, the tonal melody of classical Mandarin flowed from her lips, perfect in its pronunciation. Without a pause, she delved into the poetic cadence of classical Arabic and then into the spiritual resonance of Sanskrit. With each new paragraph, a new language, a new feat that defied logic. It was not a recitation, it was a masterful performance, a symphony of knowledge pouring from the mouth of a 12-year-old girl in a mended school uniform. Richard and her mother Maria watched, paralyzed, witnessing a miracle their minds struggled to comprehend. When she finished reading, a reverent silence took hold of the room. Lucy placed the document on the table. "Would you like me to translate the meaning?" she asked Richard, her voice now carrying a quiet authority. He could only nod, mute. "And then," she translated. But it wasn't a technical translation. It was a mirror. "The document speaks of true wealth," she began. "It says that wisdom does not dwell in palaces, but in humble hearts, and that a man's worth is not measured by his coins, but by his ability to see the dignity in every soul." Each word was a precise and painful reflection of Richard Sterling's own character. The translation continued, and each sentence was a deeper blow to the billionaire's ego. "It says that he who believes himself superior because of his possessions is the poorest of all, for he has lost the ability to recognize the light in others." Lucy stared at him, her voice firm. "And that true power is not in the ability to humiliate, but in the strength to uplift." The final revelation was the moral checkmate, the purpose of that ancient text becoming clear. And when a powerful man discovers he has been blind to the wisdom that has always surrounded him, that is the moment of his true awakening, or his eternal damnation. The document was not a test, it was a verdict. The humiliation transformed into a mirror, revealing the billionaire's true poverty. What will he do now that he has been confronted with his own soul? If you've ever seen wisdom humble arrogance, share your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel to find out if this man can be saved. The silence that fell upon the room was the sound of a world breaking. Richard Sterling, the titan, the corporate predator, seemed small and fragile behind his marble desk. The verdict of the ancient text, delivered by the voice of a 12-year-old girl, had stripped him bare, forcing him to face the emptiness of his own soul. In a hoarse whisper, he asked the only question that mattered: Who are you really? The question was not for the child, but for the universe she represented, a universe of wisdom and value he never knew existed. Nearby, Maria was crying openly, no longer from fear, but from a pride so overwhelming it hurt her chest. Lucy's answer was the simplest and, for that very reason, the most devastating. "I am exactly who you have always seen, the daughter of Maria Sanchez, a student who believes that everyone deserves dignity." She claimed no title, no status. She just affirmed her humanity. Richard, confronted with that simplicity, felt the complexity of his own lies crumble. The need to understand, to decipher this enigma, became desperate. "But how?" he asked, his voice that of a lost man. "How did you learn all of this?" It was his first genuine question, the first time he admitted his own vast ignorance, the first step toward humility. Lucy then revealed the existence of her secret university, the municipal library. She described her teachers, the human treasures the city hid in plain sight. The Syrian literature professor who now drove a taxi, the retired Chinese academic, the Italian housekeeper. She painted for him a portrait of a parallel city, a metropolis of knowledge and resilience, inhabited by the very people he had spent his life treating as invisible. For Richard, the revelation was a profound shock. He realized that in his pursuit of wealth, he had isolated himself from the world's true fortune, the shared wisdom of the human experience, a treasure he could never buy. Finally broken, Richard looked from the daughter to the mother, and for the first time, he truly saw them. He saw the dignity, the strength, the resilience. He saw everything that was missing in his own life. In a voice choked with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades, he first addressed Maria. "Forgive me for 8 years of disrespect, for never seeing the incredible person you are." And then he turned to Lucy in an act of complete surrender. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the confession an open wound. "I don't know how to be better." And he made the plea that would seal his transformation. "Please, would you teach me?" The richest man in the country had just asked to be a student of the cleaning lady and her daughter. Richard Sterling's education began with an act of humility. He accepted Lucy's conditions without hesitation. The first was the easiest and most symbolic. Her mother, Maria, was promoted to a newly created position of Director of Human Development, with a salary that reflected her true worth. The second was the creation of the Lucy Sanchez Scholarship Fund, a robust program to finance the education of talented youth from working-class families. But the third condition was the one that truly began to dismantle his ego. He would take Mandarin lessons with Lucy every Tuesday at the Mille public library. The billionaire, accustomed to giving orders, would now be the student of a 12-year-old girl. The first class was a lesson in cultural and personal shock. Richard, in his designer suit, felt like an alien in the municipal library, a vibrant space of democratic knowledge he never knew existed. There, Lucy was not the housekeeper's daughter, but a patient and demanding teacher. He struggled with the tones of Mandarin, his command and control voice sounding clumsy and childish. He felt completely ignorant, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. And through that difficulty, he began to understand the courage it took to learn, to be vulnerable, to admit that you don't know everything. Humility, he discovered, was a muscle he had never exercised. But the deepest lesson came when Lucy introduced him to her other teachers. He met Ahmed, the former Syrian university professor who now drove a taxi, and Mrs. Wang, the retired Chinese academic. People he would have, dismissed as service workers, revealed themselves to be intellectual giants, bearers of a wisdom and resilience that left him speechless. He realized that his city wasn't just a map of his investments, but a rich ecosystem of knowledge and human experience from which he had been isolated by sheer prejudice. The real wealth, he understood, was not in his glass towers, but in the life stories he, in his arrogance, had always refused to listen to. Inspired and transformed by these lessons, Richard returned to his company a new man. In an emergency meeting, he shocked his board by announcing the company's new philosophy. "Our greatest asset is not our capital, but the human potential we have been wasting," he declared. The creation of the scholarship fund was just the beginning. His most radical decision was to promote Maria Sanchez. "This woman," he said, introducing her, has taught me more about leadership and dignity in 1 week than all of my MBAs. From today, she will teach us how to be a company that values people, not just profits. The revolution at Richard Sterling's company had begun. Maria, summoned to the boardroom, thought she was going to be fired. Instead, she was met with an offer that would change her life. With the same quiet dignity with which she had pushed her cleaning cart for years, she accepted the new position. But she didn't accept it as a gift or an act of charity. She accepted it as the recognition of a value she always knew she possessed. In that moment, the woman who had so long been forced to be invisible took her place at the table, not as a former housekeeper, but as a leader. Her transformation, and Richard's, proved that real change doesn't happen with just words, but with the courage to rewrite the rules of the game. Richard's transformation was not without its losses. His old friends from the elite club confronted him, calling him weak, crazy. When he refused to abandon his new path, they ostracized him. But Richard didn't feel loss. He felt liberation, as if he had shed a weight he didn't even know he was carrying. His new community didn't meet at luxury dinners, but at study tables in the public library. His new friends weren't oil tycoons, but refugee professors and working mothers. He traded a circle of mirrors that only reflected his arrogance for a circle of windows that showed him the vastness and beauty of the real world. A year later, the fruits of that change were visible and impressive. The Lucy Sanchez Scholarship Fund had already sent dozens of young people from low-income communities to the best universities, youth who otherwise would have never had the chance. At his company, under Maria's leadership, the culture of fear had been replaced by one of respect and collaboration, resulting in a record increase in productivity and satisfaction. At the first graduation ceremony for the scholarship recipients, Richard looked out at the audience of young, hopeful faces and felt a kind of wealth that his stock market trades could never provide, the richness of purpose. On that day, in front of an audience of students, parents, and journalists, Richard made his final announcement. He didn't speak of profits or markets, but of redemption. He honored Lucy as his greatest teacher, the girl who taught him the true value of life. And then he dedicated half of his personal fortune to create the Lucy Sanchez Foundation for Human Dignity, an organization that would expand educational opportunities throughout the country. It was no longer an act of charity to clear his conscience. It was the complete redefinition of his legacy, the transformation of an empire of money into an empire of opportunities, built on the values a 12-year-old girl had taught him. The story that began with an act of humiliation in a cold, soulless office ended with a celebration of hope in an auditorium full of life. It was the journey of a man who discovered that true intelligence is not proving you know more than others, but having the humility to learn from everyone. He learned that the greatest return on investment comes from investing in people. And, in the end, Richard understood that the most valuable document of his life was not the ancient text no one could read, but the bright future of a child he had finally learned to see, proving that wisdom is not found in rare manuscripts, but in the simple act of treating every human being with dignity. A story that proves it's never too late to learn life's most important lesson. If the journey of Richard, Lucy, and Maria has inspired you, subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Let's spread the message that true wealth is dignity,